Der Stahl ist hier nicht ausreichend befestigt. Wir brauchen mehr Klammern.
Ja, sonst bricht uns das bei der nächsten Salve zusammen.
Die Pläne sagen etwas anderes.
Move up! Keep firing! It's on the roof! Get down! Charge is in place. Let's move.
All right, cover them.
October 1944, Western Germany. A low sky presses down on the forested hills near the frontier. Rainwater runs in thin streams along concrete seams poured years earlier, when the war still felt distant and defensive. Inside a German bunker, the air is damp and stale. Men sit low beneath reinforced ceilings, steel helmets resting against the wall. They're trained to wait, to endure, to let the enemy break himself against concrete. Then the ground begins to change. At first, it sounds like distant thunder, slow, uneven, deliberate. The vibration is wrong. Not artillery, not aircraft. It grows heavier, closer, until dust falls from the ceiling and the concrete hums under pressure was never meant to feel. Periscope lenses tilt upward. A shadow moves where no shadow should be. Metal scrapes against concrete. The bunker was designed to face forward, to absorb shells, to funnel attackers into killing zones. It was never designed for what is happening now. Above them, an American tank is climbing, its tracks biting into reinforced angles, its weight forcing a new geometry onto old German certainty. In that moment, the logic of fixed defenses begins to fracture. And to understand why this shock mattered, one must first understand how much faith Germany had placed in these bunkers, and why breaking them changed the war along the western frontier. Long before American tanks reached the German frontier, the concrete had already been waiting. In 1936, Adolf Hitler ordered the construction of a vast defensive system along Germany's western border. It was not a single wall, but a layered belt of fortifications stretching roughly 630 kilometers from the Dutch border in the north to Switzerland in the south. Officially called the Westwall, and known to the Allies as the Siegfried Line, it was designed to do one thing above all else: delay. Germany's military planners understood that the nation could not fight a two-front war indefinitely. The Westwall was meant to buy time. Time for mobilization, time for maneuver, time to defeat enemies in detail. It was never intended to be elegant. It was intended to be brutal, static, and psychologically overwhelming. By 1940, the line included more than 18,000 individual fortifications. Concrete bunkers with walls up to 2 meters thick, interlocking machine gun positions, anti-tank ditches, and in front of many sectors, rows of reinforced concrete pyramids known as Dragon's Teeth, designed to halt armor and force vehicles into exposed channels. The doctrine behind them was rigid and deliberate. Tanks would be stopped. Infantry would be slowed. Artillery would finish the work. For years, this system had worked without being truly tested. During the fall of France in 1940, the German army advanced westward, not the other way around. The Westwall remained largely unchallenged, its bunkers manned intermittently, its concrete aging in silence. Even as Allied bombing intensified and German forces were drained to other fronts, the belief in the line's deterrent power endured. That belief would matter deeply in 1944. After the Allied landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the war in Western Europe unfolded with a speed that surprised both sides. The German army retreated across France under constant pressure, its units battered by air power, artillery, and fuel shortages. By September, American, British, and Canadian forces had reached the borders of Germany itself. For the first time since 1918, a foreign army stood ready to fight on German soil. German propaganda seized on the Westwall immediately. Newsreels showed concrete bunkers bristling with weapons. Posters promised an unbreakable shield. Soldiers arriving from shattered divisions were told that here, at last, the ground itself would fight alongside them. The message was simple: hold long enough, and the enemy would bleed. Yet the reality behind the concrete was more fragile than appearances suggested. Many bunkers were unfinished or poorly maintained. Ventilation systems were inadequate. Communications relied on field telephone lines easily severed by artillery, and the men assigned to defend them were often a mixture of exhausted veterans, inexperienced replacements, and older Volksgrenadier troops rushed into position with minimal training. Still, doctrine mattered. German defensive manuals emphasized that tanks were not the primary threat. Infantry was. Armor, it was believed, could be stopped by obstacles and anti-tank guns. Bunkers were oriented forward, with thick frontal armor and firing slits designed to dominate approach routes. Roofs, by contrast, were thinner. They were never meant to be engaged directly. Across the lines, American planners were confronting a different reality. The rapid pursuit across France had stretched supply lines thin. Fuel shortages slowed advances. German resistance stiffened as units fell back into prepared positions. The days of open maneuver were ending. What lay ahead was deliberate assault against fixed defenses. And fixed defenses demanded adaptation. The U.S. Army had learned hard lessons in North Africa and Normandy. Frontal attacks against fortified positions were costly. Artillery alone could not always neutralize concrete. Airstrikes were imprecise against small, hardened targets. Success increasingly depended on coordination. Infantry, engineers, tanks, and artillery working in close, dangerous proximity. By the time American forces reached the Westwall, they faced a dilemma. To go around the fortifications was often impossible. To pause was to give the enemy time to recover. To attack directly meant confronting a system designed to kill attackers slowly. It was in this narrowing space between doctrine and necessity that unconventional solutions began to appear. Solutions born not in manuals, but under fire. And among them was a realization that would soon shatter German assumptions, that a tank did not always need to break a bunker open to defeat it. Sometimes it only needed to climb. The conditions that allowed this realization to take hold were shaped by months of evolving American armor doctrine and by the specific machines that would be asked to do the impossible. The American tank that approached the German frontier in 1944 was not a perfect weapon. It was, however, a flexible one. The M4 Sherman, the backbone of U.S. armored forces in Western Europe, had been designed with mobility and reliability in mind rather than sheer firepower. It could be produced in vast numbers, repaired quickly, and operated by crews with limited training. Against German heavy tanks, its limitations were well known. Its armor was thinner. Its main guns struggled at long range against Panthers and Tigers. But the Sherman was never meant to fight alone, and it was never meant to fight only other tanks. By late 1944, American armor doctrine emphasized cooperation. Tanks were tools, part of a combined system that included infantry, engineers, artillery observers, and air support. In the hedgerows of Normandy, tank crews had already learned to adapt. They welded steel prongs onto their hulls to break through earthen embankments. They used bulldozer blades to reshape the battlefield itself. Improvisation became an accepted part of survival. When the U.S. Army encountered the Westwall, these habits mattered. The German fortifications were formidable, but they were static. Their geometry assumed predictable movement. Anti-tank ditches were cut, at specific angles. Dragon's teeth were spaced to trap vehicles of a certain width and ground clearance. Bunkers faced outward, their embrasures carefully calculated to dominate expected avenues of approach. The entire system relied on the enemy behaving as anticipated. American commanders quickly realized that if those expectations could be violated, the line could be weakened. Engineers played a central role. Combat engineer units moved forward with infantry, clearing mines under fire, placing demolition charges, and marking safe lanes for armor. In many sectors, direct demolition of bunkers proved costly and slow. Thick concrete absorbed explosives. Collapsing one position did not always silence adjacent ones. Every delay allowed German artillery to range in more accurately. Meanwhile, tank crews observed something else. Many bunkers were built into slopes or shallow rises. Their roofs, while reinforced, were not designed to bear concentrated, moving weight. The idea was not entirely new. During the First World War, tanks had crossed trenches and crushed obstacles that infantry could not. But here, the stakes were higher and the materials harder. Shermans, weighing between 30 and 33 tons, depending on variant, had wide tracks that distributed weight more effectively than earlier designs. In muddy conditions, this was a liability. On firm concrete, it became an advantage. With careful approach, tanks could mount the sloped faces of certain bunkers or press against their edges, forcing tracks on surfaces the defenders never expected to be used as ground. This was not standard doctrine. It was situational, dangerous, often improvised in the moment. But when it worked, the effect was profound. From inside a bunker, the sensation was disorienting. Tanks were supposed to appear in firing arcs, not overhead. Periscopes offered limited visibility. Communication with neighboring positions was often disrupted by bombardment. When a tank climbed onto or against a bunker, machine gun fire became useless. Anti-tank weapons could not depress their barrels sufficiently. The bunker, once a fortress, became a trap. American infantry exploited this. While tanks applied pressure above, infantry moved in close. Smoke grenades obscured vision. Engineers placed charges at ventilation shafts or rear entrances. In some cases, the psychological impact alone was enough. Reports from the period described German soldiers abandoning positions or surrendering once they realized their bunker could no longer protect them. Leadership at the small unit level was crucial. Platoon leaders and tank commanders made decisions in minutes, not hours. Radios crackled with partial information. Maps were often inaccurate, yet the momentum of the advance demanded action. There was no time to wait for perfect solutions. These methods did not render the Westwall irrelevant overnight. Fighting along the line was slow and costly. The Hurtgen Forest, Aachen, and countless unnamed villages became scenes of attritional combat. But the aura of invincibility surrounding German concrete defenses was eroding. Each bunker, neutralized in an unexpected way, sent a message down the line. The enemy was learning, adapting, refusing to fight on prescribed terms. And as these encounters multiplied, they revealed the conflict from multiple perspectives: human, tactical, technological, and psychological. Each shedding light on why the moment when tanks climbed bunkers mattered far beyond the concrete itself. Those perspectives now come into focus. Inside the bunkers, German soldiers experienced a dissonance between training and reality. For years, their instruction had reinforced the idea that concrete and steel were near impregnable. Machine gun slits offered precise fields of fire, and the embrasures above were angled to protect against shells and shrapnel. Yet, as the American tanks approached, everything changed. From within, the first signs were subtle. a vibration underfoot, a metallic scraping echoing off the ceiling. Soldiers leaned forward to peer through periscopes, straining for the source. When the tank began to mount the bunker roof, disbelief replaced fear. It was impossible. Tanks did not climb concrete. They were machines of the ground, not conquerors of steel. Orders to fire seemed meaningless. Anti-tank weapons could not adjust their elevation quickly enough. Artillery observers were out of range, and a narrow interior prevented rapid repositioning. Panic was controlled but tangible. Some soldiers abandoned firing positions. Others attempted desperate manual defenses. The psychological weight of being literally under the enemy created confusion that no manual had anticipated. By the end of these assaults, reports recorded the collapse of discipline in certain positions. Soldiers surrendered not because they were outnumbered, but because the rules they had trusted were suddenly invalidated. Their entire defensive doctrine, built over years, had been shattered in moments. On the other side, tank crews confronted their own challenges. Sherman operators were trained for mobility and fire support, not feats of mechanical audacity. Visibility was limited. Hatches were low, and periscopes offered only narrow views of terrain. Crews relied on intuition, communication with infantry, and split-second judgment. Mounting a bunker was never part of the official doctrine, yet necessity demanded improvisation. Tracks rumbled over muddy terrain and short slopes before meeting concrete angles. The tank tilted, groaned under stress, and pressed forward. Inside, the driver adjusted throttle and steering, while the commander called for coordinated fire. The experience combined fear, exhilaration, and methodical calculation. One misjudgment could tip the vehicle, immobilize it, or expose it to anti-tank fire. But when successful, the effect was immediate. The tank dominated the bunker from above, rendering small arms fire useless and providing a new firing platform for infantry or machine guns. Crew reports emphasized the surreal nature of the operation. One noted that the moment the Sherman settled on the bunker, the defenders stopped firing. Their eyes were wide. They had no idea what to do next. For American tankers, it was a mixture of tactical triumph and sheer improvisation under fire. From a military perspective, the phenomenon of tanks climbing bunkers represented a shift in combat logic. German fortifications had been designed for predictable movement patterns. Attackers would approach on certain vectors, face obstacles, and be funneled into kill zones. Heavy armor concentrated on frontal assault could then be neutralized. The American solution exploited overlooked vulnerabilities. Bunkers were strong frontally, but the roof's thickness and slope were not calculated for concentrated moving weight. Combined with infantry support, smoke screens, and engineering units, tanks could breach the line of defense without necessarily destroying it. This tactic also created immediate secondary effects. Neighboring bunkers, observing the anomaly, hesitated. German units relying on interlocking fire found their arcs blocked or compromised. Defenders were forced into reactive, disorganized behavior. This was not merely mechanical superiority, it was operational disruption. Commanders at higher levels took note. The ability to bypass the expected killing zones forced a re-evaluation of armored assault strategies. It blurred the line between direct assault and psychological warfare, showing that flexibility and improvisation could overcome even the most meticulously planned static defenses. The Sherman tank was not an invincible machine, but its design inadvertently enabled feats German engineers had never anticipated. Weighing roughly 30 to 33 tons, the Sherman distributed that weight over wide tracks, giving it a relatively low ground pressure. This made climbing moderate inclines possible without sinking into mud, a critical factor on the Western Front's rain-slicked terrain. The bunkers, while formidable, were built to withstand artillery fire and infantry explosives, not the concentrated, moving weight of a tank on their roofs. Roof slabs, often reinforced to about 1 meter of concrete, could deflect shells but were not designed to bear a vehicle pressing downward. In certain sectors, the combination of slope, track traction, and momentum allowed Sherman crews to achieve what was previously considered impossible: vertical dominance. Engineers often reinforced or modified their vehicles in the field. Some mounted steel blades to pry or push obstacles. Others adjusted suspensions to better handle irregular surfaces. These improvisations, combined with fundamental mechanical reliability, turned an ordinary tank into a tool capable of rewriting the battlefield geometry. Command decisions on both sides were pivotal. American platoon leaders and tank commanders had to make split-second judgments in chaotic conditions. Radios were prone to interference. Maps were sometimes outdated. Yet advancing or retreating at the wrong moment could result in high casualties or stalled operations. Small unit leaders exercised autonomy. A tank commander deciding to mount a bunker roof, supported by infantry and engineers, took responsibility for lives and outcomes simultaneously. Their success relied on rapid assessment, trust in crew coordination, and a willingness to depart from established doctrine. On the German side, junior officers faced an equally acute dilemma. Traditional orders emphasized holding positions and relying on fortifications. When those fortifications failed in unanticipated ways, communication lines broke down. Decisions had to be made under fire, often without guidance from higher command. In many cases, morale and initiative collapsed before the physical structure of the defense did, illustrating that leadership was as much about adaptability as it was about formal rank. The human dimension of these encounters was striking. For German soldiers, the bunker represented certainty, a controlled environment where fear could be managed. Suddenly, the rules changed. Tanks climbed roofs, machine guns were rendered useless, and the very ground beneath them seemed to betray their expectations. Reports from survivors describe frozen disbelief as a common reaction. Surrender occurred not out of numerical inferiority, but from the shock of witnessing the impossible. Conversely, American crews often noted the eerie, quiet, or sudden cessation of enemy fire when the first Shermans mounted bunkers. Psychological dominance, in these moments, matched mechanical superiority. The shock extended beyond the immediate battlefield. Nearby units observed the failure of once untouchable fortifications and recalibrated their perception of German defensive strength. The aura of invincibility surrounding concrete positions eroded quickly, accelerating both tactical and moral collapse. The first breakthrough came in early October 1944, along the dense forested sectors near Aachen. The city itself had been declared a fortress by German command, and the surrounding terrain was dotted with bunkers, anti-tank ditches, and dragon's teeth. For weeks, American forces had attempted standard frontal assaults with artillery barges and infantry-led attacks, but the fortified positions resisted with tenacious accuracy. Casualties mounted and progress stalled. On October 11th, a U.S. Armored Task Force, supported by combat engineers and infantry, approached a cluster of bunkers near the village of Mersenhausen. Reconnaissance had revealed shallow roof angles on several positions. Commanders made a calculated decision. Rather than waiting for prolonged bombardment, they would attempt a maneuver previously considered impossible. Tanks would climb. The lead Sherman, pressed forward by a seasoned crew, made first contact. Its tracks bit into the bunker's sloped concrete roof. scraping against reinforced steel. Inside, the German gunners attempted to return fire, but their machine guns could not elevate high enough. Anti-tank weapons were too slow to respond. The bunker, designed to withstand shells, shuddered under the new weight. American infantry immediately advanced under the tank's protective presence, deploying smoke and grenades to suppress adjacent positions. Engineers followed, placing charges at ventilation shafts and rear entrances. Within minutes, the first bunker was silenced. Its defenders surrendered, faces pale, still absorbing the reality of what had happened. Word of the maneuver spread rapidly through both sides. German units, observing from neighboring positions, froze in disbelief. Platoon leaders attempted to recalibrate firing arcs, reposition troops, or call for reinforcements, but the disruption was already systemic. Tanks were no longer constrained to approach lanes. The rules of engagement, the predictable geometry of warfare, had been rewritten in a matter of minutes. By mid-afternoon, several other bunkers in the sector were neutralized in similar fashion. The combined effect of mechanical dominance, infantry support, and psychological shock caused a ripple of panic. German commanders tried to organize counterfire, but artillery could not adjust quickly enough, and machine gun crews were rendered ineffective by unexpected angles of attack. The operation was methodical, yet improvisational. Each tank movement was deliberate, measured for balance and stability. Infantry followed closely, exploiting openings created by the tank's audacious positioning. Engineers acted rapidly, reinforcing or demolishing obstacles to maintain momentum. Communication lines crackled constantly with updates, highlighting the coordination required for what might appear, from a distance, as spontaneous chaos. By evening, the first line of bunkers along this sector had been rendered impotent. Casualty reports indicated that German losses were heavy not only in numbers, but in morale. Survivors reported that the American forces had found a way to climb concrete, and that their weapons were useless against a threat approaching from above. The day ended not with massive explosions or firestorms, but with a quieter, more insidious victory. The demonstration that static fortifications, long considered unassailable, could be overcome through ingenuity, coordination, and sheer audacity. This operation set the stage for subsequent assaults deeper into the Westwall, where the pattern repeated and the psychological impact amplified. The stage was set for a series of decisive engagements that would redefine armored warfare along the western frontier. The following week, October 18th to 22nd, saw the momentum of American assaults intensify along the Hurtgen Forest sector, a labyrinth of dense trees, muddy trails, and fortified positions. Here, the Westwall's bunkers were interconnected with trenches, minefields, and hidden machine gun nests. The terrain was intended to neutralize mobility, but became the proving ground for tank ingenuity. On October 19th, the 9th Armored Division approached a heavily fortified ridge near Schmidt. Reconnaissance revealed multiple concrete bunkers, each designed with overlapping fields of fire. Artillery strikes had softened the area, but not destroyed the positions. Infantry attacks alone had stalled. Commanders faced the same tactical dilemma as before: continue costly assaults or attempt to exploit the unexpected vulnerability of bunker roofs. Sherman crews, now briefed on previous successes, advanced cautiously. The first tank climbed the sloped face of the northernmost bunker. It groaned under stress, but its tracks held. Inside, German defenders fired point-blank, but the guns could not reach high enough to strike the hull. Engineers moved in from the flanks, placing demolition charges at ventilation shafts and rear exits. Smoke filled the air, obscuring observation points and further disorienting defenders. By mid-morning, 3 bunkers had been neutralized in rapid succession. Radio reports from American infantry described German soldiers staring at the tracks above them, as if the world had turned upside down. Psychological collapse accompanied mechanical conquest. Some bunkers surrendered immediately, while others were abandoned as crews fled to avoid entrapment. The impact on German coordination was immediate. Platoon leaders attempted to establish new defensive lines, but the terrain offered little cover once the American tanks dominated the heights. Fields of fire were disrupted, interlocking machine gun positions were bypassed, and the remaining anti-tank crews could not elevate their weapons sufficiently. Communication lines, often reliant on field telephones, were severed by artillery and by the movement of armored units over unexpected routes. By October 21st, the ridge was fully under American control. The success was not attributed to overwhelming numbers, but to the combination of audacious maneuver, precise infantry coordination, and technological exploitation. Reports highlighted the unusual method: tanks climbing bunkers, a tactic never envisioned in manuals but executed with terrifying efficiency. German units began to retreat to secondary positions, abandoning fortifications that had previously been considered impregnable. Higher command expressed both disbelief and urgency, issuing orders to reinforce remaining positions and to reassess defensive doctrine. Yet the momentum had shifted. The Westwall, once a symbol of security, was now a series of vulnerable points. Across the front, similar incidents occurred. Tanks scaled bunker roofs. Infantry pressed through gaps created by unexpected angles of attack, and engineers neutralized positions from within. Casualty reports documented both the human cost and the rapid disintegration of what had been perceived as solid defensive lines. By the end of October, the tactical and psychological lessons were clear. No bunker, however well constructed, was invulnerable to adaptive, coordinated assault. The very concept of static fortifications had been challenged, and the Westwall's aura of invincibility was effectively shattered. The immediate consequences of the October 1944 operations along the Westwall were both tangible and psychological. On the battlefield, casualty reports documented dozens of German soldiers killed, wounded, or captured during the bunker assaults. In several sectors, entire platoons surrendered without prolonged engagement, citing the impossibility of defending against tanks that could mount their positions. One after-action report from the U.S. 9th Armored Division noted, once the Sherman was on the bunker, resistance ceased. Men laid down arms, disbelief evident on every face. American forces suffered losses as well, though significantly lower than in previous frontal assaults. Tanks were occasionally immobilized, infantry exposed to machine gun fire during clearing operations, and engineers risked detonations while breaching secondary defenses. However, the efficiency of the combined tactics, armor, infantry, and engineers, reduced prolonged exposure to concentrated German fire, which had previously exacted a heavier toll. Beyond the battlefield, the German command structure reacted with a mixture of alarm and confusion. Field reports highlighted that traditional anti-tank defenses were failing not due to numerical inferiority, but because of unanticipated maneuverability. Orders were issued to reinforce bunker roofs where feasible, increase inter-bunker coordination, and position heavier weapons to counter elevated threats. Yet, the pace of American advances often outstripped these adaptations, leaving many positions partially completed or inadequately staffed. The psychological impact on German troops was profound. Soldiers trained to rely on concrete for protection faced a new reality. The rules of bunker warfare no longer applied. Witnessing tanks atop bunkers created a cognitive dissonance. trained instincts failed to match the situation. Reports from surviving German soldiers consistently described feelings of shock, disbelief, and a sense of inevitability that permeated subsequent defenses. Morale, already fragile from continuous retreats across France and Belgium, eroded further. The success of these tactics also had immediate operational implications. American units, recognizing the efficiency of combined assaults, began to standardize procedures for engaging fortified positions. Engineering support became an integral component of every attack. Smoke and suppression tactics were coordinated to maximize infantry and armor effectiveness, and tank crews were briefed on exploiting terrain and fortification weaknesses. The lessons learned in Merzenhausen, Schmidt, and the Hürtgen Forest quickly spread across the U.S. Army Command, informing subsequent operations along the Siegfried Line. Meanwhile, German forces reassessed defensive doctrines. Reports emphasized that static fortifications, no matter how well constructed, required flexible countermeasures. Commanders ordered the deployment of heavier weapons, reinforced bunkers, and mobile reserves where possible. However, logistical constraints and the speed of the American advance limited these efforts. By late October, numerous sectors of the Westwall had experienced similar breakthroughs, signaling a shift in both tactical and strategic dynamics along the Western Front. This convergence of battlefield success, doctrinal adaptation, and psychological dominance set the stage for the next phase of the conflict, as American forces pushed deeper into Germany. The erosion of the Westwall's credibility had consequences that extended beyond immediate engagements, shaping both subsequent operations and the broader understanding of armored warfare in the late stages of World War II. As American forces continued their advance in late October and early November 1944, the tactical breakthroughs along the Westwall began to have strategic repercussions. The once feared Siegfried Line, a symbol of German defensive strength, was increasingly viewed as vulnerable. German planners acknowledged in internal communications that fortifications designed to dominate the battlefield were being systematically neutralized, often without large-scale destruction. This revelation forced a reallocation of resources. Troops, artillery, and engineers were redirected to bolster weak points, slowing reinforcement elsewhere along the front. In towns like Aachen, German morale deteriorated sharply. Civilians, witnessing the rapid collapse of previously unassailable bunkers, grew anxious about the inevitability of occupation. Soldiers who had survived the retreat from France now faced the psychological burden of defending positions that could no longer guarantee safety. Personal accounts from Volksgrenadier units describe a feeling of exposure, as if the ground itself had betrayed us, illustrating the pervasive sense of helplessness induced by American armored ingenuity. The U.S. Army capitalized on these effects. Commanders incorporated lessons learned into operational planning, ensuring that infantry, engineers, and armor operated as a cohesive unit in every subsequent assault. Combined arms tactics became standardized doctrine. Sherman tanks, once vulnerable to frontal anti-tank fire, were now instruments capable of reshaping the battlefield both physically and psychologically. Their ability to exploit the weaknesses of static defenses transformed the pace and nature of the advance into the German heartland. Strategically, these breakthroughs accelerated the collapse of the Westwall. Sectors that had resisted prolonged bombardment succumbed quickly once American forces applied combined tactics. The psychological impact extended beyond isolated battles. German high command recognized that static fortifications alone could not halt an adaptive and resourceful enemy. Reports emphasized the need for mobile reserves and flexible counterattacks. Yet the rapidity of American assaults often outpaced any feasible German response. By early November, the operational consequences were clear. The fall of Aachen, one of the first German cities captured on home soil, demonstrated that the combination of innovation, coordination, and psychological pressure could overcome even the most robust defenses. German units increasingly abandoned fortified positions without prolonged engagement, further signaling the erosion of both confidence and capability along the western frontier. These events illustrate a broader lesson. Fortifications, no matter how well designed, are only as effective as the doctrine, morale, and adaptability of those who occupy them. In the case of the Westwall, the integration of American tactical innovation, technological application, and human ingenuity revealed vulnerabilities previously underestimated, reshaping the final months of combat in Western Germany. The consequences of these battles naturally lead to reflection, not merely on the mechanics of warfare, but on the human, technological, and philosophical lessons drawn from the moment when tanks climbed bunkers and the seemingly immutable walls of Germany began to crumble. The image of a Sherman tank perched atop a German bunker endures not merely as a tactical anecdote, but as a testament to adaptability under fire. It illustrates the limits of static defenses in the face of innovation and coordinated effort. Concrete and steel, formidable as they were, could not substitute for foresight, flexibility, or the human will to respond to the unexpected. For German soldiers, the experience was a profound psychological rupture. Bunkers that had once symbolized certainty became monuments to vulnerability. For American forces, the maneuver showcased the power of ingenuity and cooperation. Armor, infantry, and engineers acting in concert could achieve what doctrine alone could not predict. The lesson was clear. War is a contest not just of machines, but of minds, and those who can adapt will shape the battlefield. Strategically, the assaults against the Westwall accelerated the Allied advance into Germany. The aura of invincibility surrounding fortifications was shattered, morale shifted, and operational momentum favored the attackers. Beyond the immediate theater, the episode would influence post-war military thinking about the role of armored forces, combined arms doctrine, and the psychology of defense. Ultimately, the moment when tanks climbed bunkers is a quiet yet profound reminder of war's paradox. Structures built to impose control can be overturned by resourcefulness, and even the strongest defenses yield to human ingenuity. In the ruins of concrete, the story is not only of destruction, but of the enduring capacity to confront the impossible and, through courage and invention, to achieve it.